Claire, I thought you only talked about haunted locations. Why have you dedicated a whole video to a haunted house attraction? Just take a seat, alright? All will become clear. So, right, I know this might seem like I'm talking about the wrong kind of haunted house, as Asylum 49 is known as Utah's largest haunted attraction. But the reason that we're sitting down to chat about this place is not because of the blood-stained rooms, or the creepy mannequins, or the scary actors running around with chainsaws. It's because the Old Tooele Valley Hospital that Asylum 49 calls home is so unbelievably haunted. Like, for real haunted. Just imagine, like, you're going for a night of scares at like a haunted house and then seeing an actual ghost. You can't put a price on that. So about half an hour outside of Salt Lake City sits a city called Tooele, which originally, like in the mid-1800s, was a farming town. That was until the railroads were built and the International Smelting and Refining Company set up their operations. This obviously brought more jobs into the area, more people moved in, like, it's really growing as a town now. But during World War II, the area was chosen as the location for a bunch of military bases and even like a storage depot for chemical weapons. So very quickly, Tooele found that there was a lot of people moving into the area to work on these different military bases and things. Like, they needed infrastructure. The old hospital that had served Tooele up until this point was basically some dude's house from the 1800s that was converted, and it just wasn't going to cut it anymore. And that's when Tooele Valley Hospital was built just off Main Street in the city. And so, right, I could be wrong here, but I wanted to mention it in case I'm not wrong. But if I am, then comment and let me know, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Things like Ghost Adventures and a bunch of people online were saying that the original hospital in Tooele, so this converted house, sat on the site where the Tooele Valley Hospital was eventually constructed. And this house, it was built in 1873 by a man called Samuel Francis Lee, who built it as his home for the family. In 1913, it was passed over to the county, which converted it into a nursing home for the elderly and those with mental disabilities that required extra care. Apparently, obviously, it was started with good intentions, but eventually became known as the poorhouse, and it kind of became like a dumping ground for the dregs of your family that you didn't want to kind of look after yourself anymore. Like, this is still the early 1900s. Times are very hard and very much different to what they are now. After its stint as the poorhouse, it became the hospital that served the community until the what was then new hospital was built, which is the one we're talking about today. But I don't think those two hospitals were on the same site. Looking at the records on the Tooele County government website, it looks like Samuel's house, that would eventually become the first hospital, was actually on Main Street, whereas the Tooele Hospital sits off Main Street, like down one of the side roads kind of thing. And so I just wanted to point it out because it could become important later on in the story. So anyway, now we've got that out of the way, the construction began in 1949 on the Tooele Valley Hospital, and by 1953 it had its first proper purpose-built hospital. And I'm not sure at what point in its lifetime, whether it was part of the hospital that was converted or it was always the case, but they actually used part of the hospital as a nursing home. I suppose it's convenient, isn't it? Like, you have a medical emergency with one of your residents, the doctors are only through like a set of double doors. And if that's not enough, the next stage is also catered for because the hospital sits right next to the Tooele City Cemetery. I'm not even joking. You move into the nursing home, you get sick and end up in the hospital and don't have to go very far after that. Very efficient. I really hope none of the patient rooms looked out onto the cemetery. I don't imagine that's going to do much for their positive outlook to help with recovery. But as far as hospitals go, in the 1950s, it did the best it could. It was geared up more for like emergency rooms kind of thing. Like, if you were in an accident or had a baby or a heart attack or something, Tooele residents could get help quickly. So it obviously wasn't as kitted out or specialized as a hospital in a bigger place like Salt Lake City or anything, but it was staffed by good people just trying to do their jobs. But that still didn't stop it from being lovingly nicknamed the Hospital of Death. Really fills you with confidence, doesn't it? And so it's no wonder why a lot of residents of Tooele actually opted to travel that little bit further to Salt Lake City to go to a different hospital when they needed medical care. But for the people that took the chance, as if the place is like dicing with death or something. No, like I said, it was a decent hospital. It served its purpose quite well, and it continued to care for patients through the 20th century. But by the 1990s, it was clear that the city was growing, more houses were being built, advances in modern medicine. You're gonna need better infrastructure. In May 2002, a new hospital was opened in the city, the Mountain West Medical Center. This replaced the old hospital, which was closed down that same year and sold to Rocky Mountain Care, which was the company that ran the nursing home. And even though they took on this like whole building, they didn't do a huge amount with the rest of the hospital. They carried on just like looking after the old folks in their little section and kept the rest of the hospital like locked up. At one point, they did try to do a little like haunted house attraction themselves, but nowhere near on the scale that's there now in Asylum 49. And that is all thanks to a guy called Kim Anderson. So Kim had been working in haunted houses for years at this point and was on the lookout for a location where he could set up his own haunt, which is what people in the business call these haunted scare attraction things. So like I said, oh man, this is gonna get so confusing today. Kim had been working in haunted houses, as in like scary attractions that you go to get scared during Halloween. You know, the ones that usually run through October in like the lead up to Halloween with all the scary scenes set up and the actors covered in blood chasing you with chainsaws and all of that. Like Universal's like Halloween Horror Nights and things like that. Did anyone else see that Universal have just got the trademarks for Halloween Horror Nights in the UK? Like I know there's talk of a theme park in Bedford, I think, but maybe we're going to be seeing Halloween Horror Nights come to the UK too if it all goes ahead. But yeah, anyway, today, haunted house means scary attraction, not actual haunted location with ghosts. Although this place is haunted with ghosts. Well, I think that cleared it up nicely. Well done, Claire. Good job. And I've only ever done 2 of these haunted attractions, I guess. I did the Warwick Castle dungeons, and I don't think I was older than like 10 years old, which was a huge mistake. I just saw all of these signs for experience the history of Warwick Castle in the dungeons and conveniently didn't take seriously the parts where it said not for the faint of heart or weak of stomach. And I mean, come on, that could just be marketing. But I should have read more closely the part where the signs were saying, no, really, this isn't just an exhibition into the plague or the torture dungeon. Like, please don't even bother if you've got a heart condition for legal reasons. Obviously, that isn't what the sign actually said, but you get the idea. And so I instantly regretted my decision as soon as we went into the first room and this guy came up behind me and shouted in my ear and I was not okay. Like I was there to learn about the dark history of Warwick Castle and instead I've got actors sneaking up behind me. I am not okay with this. So I was traumatized for a long time after that. Like I wouldn't even entertain the idea of going into one again. But then we were given tickets to Screamfest this year as a wedding present and I freaking loved it. I was just giggling all the way out of the maze while being chased by a man with a chainsaw and shooting paintballs at rugby players dressed up as aliens. It was brilliant. So now we will absolutely be going to Screamfest every year just because we had such an amazing time. But with these things, with these like scare attractions, these haunted houses, like you Americans, you take it to a whole other level out there. Like I think there might be a few places over here that do like what they call like full contact extreme haunts, where like actors can actually like pick you up and carry you away from your group and stuff like that. But not many, if any at all. Like I'm not really sure we have any. But that's what Kim Anderson had in mind when he was like walking through the Old Tooele Hospital, like a full-on extreme haunted house. Scare the crap out of paying customers, bonus points if they pee themselves kind of level. And at the point that Kim first visited the hospital, it had been about 4 years since it had closed down, but they hadn't even took any of the equipment out to like try and sell it, like nothing had been moved. It literally looked like 4 years ago, all of the hospital staff just got up, walked out and locked the doors. There was papers still on desks, like medical equipment was still next to beds. Even patient x-ray images were like still stuck on that light box thing. It was giving apocalypse. And it was getting those creative juices a-flowing. Within weeks, the paperwork had been signed, and Kim, his wife Cammie, and Kim's niece Dusty and her husband Lyle, they were the proud owners of the Old Tooele Valley Hospital. As soon as they got the keys, they got to work turning it into the scariest haunted attraction they could create, Asylum 49. The 49 stands for 1949, the year that construction started on the hospital. The more you know. And Kim was about to find out exactly what he had just brought into. Because the very day he picked up the keys, he started experiencing strange things as the hidden residents of the old hospital started checking out who the new guy was. So the nursing home in the previous year, they'd like tried their hand at their own haunted attraction thing, right? Which I mean, fair enough. Like you've got this great big other section of the building that you own just rotting away behind you and it's still got all of the hospital equipment in it. That's going to be automatically creepy as hell in the dark. So why not make a few more dollars, generating a bit of side income for the old folks? But I'm guessing it was probably more trouble than it was worth when you're not doing it full time and you've got actual elderly residents that need medical care that you should be looking after anyway. I don't know. But they'd left the remnants of this maze-like thing in the hospital's conference room. So there was just like fabric hanging from the wood beams on the ceiling, so it made this maze that people would have to walk through, just with like fabric for the walls kind of thing. Kim was having to walk around his new purchase and decided to give it a go. I mean, I could just imagine him like tutting in his head thinking, oh, amateurs. I mean, I don't know, I'm just guessing. Like, this guy had been working in haunted houses for most of his life at this point. But even as he was walking through this maze, he just didn't feel right. Like, he was definitely being watched by someone or something that he couldn't see. Then, he felt something touch the outside of his leg. He looked down to see the leg of his shorts was being moved by something invisible. Absolutely not. Which was about his reaction too. He pegged it out of the maze, just swimming through these bits of fabrics, trying to head in the general direction of the door. When he made it back outside into the cold, hard light of day, he was just catching his breath and trying to convince himself that he must have just imagined it. Like, there was no way that I just saw what I think I just saw, right? But I don't think he really believed it. One day, he met up with the owners of the nursing home, who had been the one to try their hand at setting up their own haunt, because they were still operating in their nursing home section of the hospital at the time. They'd got round to the conference room with the fabric maze in there, and they just kind of off the cuff, like, kind of asked what Kim thought of the maze. And he started a bit like, oh yeah, it's good, yeah, you know, yada yada. But then he started to come clean about his experience in there. Bearing in mind, up until this point, he hadn't told a single soul about what he thought he'd experienced in there, like, not even his wife. He was expecting the owner to, like, laugh in his face or something, like this grown-ass man running out of a little maze because he thought a ghost touched him. Yeah, no. The nursing home owner looked him dead in the eyes and said that other people had experienced the exact same thing in there. The visitors to the maze also used to comment that the little blonde girl in the middle was scary as hell. Like, you're in a creepy hospital going through a maze that you know is set up for maximum fear, and then you see a creepy little kid, you're gonna be terrified. But you already know that I'm about to tell you that there wasn't a little blonde girl that had been hired as an actor in that room. There was no little blonde girl on the team at all. The reputation of the old hospital was already more than well established though. Like, people in the area knew that the hospital was haunted. I mean, even the nurses working in the nursing home were experiencing unexplained activity. Some paranormal investigators asked him if they could spend the night in the hospital, to which he was like, super curious to see what they would capture, but also, do I really want to know? Anyway, he let them, and they captured ridiculous EVPs. Like, these were completely lucid, intelligent answers to specific questions. The paranormal investigators came back for a second investigation, and Kim had decided to, like, follow them around to see what they were capturing. I guess it was kind of like sanity checking for himself whether they were really making it up or whatever, just because these EVPs that they captured the first time around just seemed so clear. Because fair play to him, like, he was a little bit of a skeptical man at heart, but these people seemed very professional and not like they were trying to hide anything. But there's always that little niggling doubt in the back of your mind, isn't there, that they might be making it up, which won't ever go away until you actually do it for yourself. And so that's what Kim did. One night, armed with a digital recorder and a torch, he spent the night in the hospital alone, which, brave. Fair play. He didn't experience anything while he was there. There were no phantom children tugging on his clothes this time, no disembodied voices, like anything. He was just asking questions into the void, and obviously his voice recorder, but seeming getting nothing back. He started listening to the playback on his drive home after locking up. Didn't hear anything weird. He was kind of like following in his mind where he was in the hospital, like while he was listening, and he wasn't really hearing anything that was out of the ordinary, not getting any responses to his questions or anything like that, until he reached the emergency room. And after he'd asked one of his questions, the crackly but relatively clear sound of a man came through, saying, "Don't tell me. Don't tell me." Well, that was it. He knew he was the only living person in the hospital while he was asking those questions. He knew that the ER was not close enough to the nursing home to hear what came through on the recorder. Like, it couldn't have been, like, from a poor soul on the other side of the wall saying he's dying to the nurses. Like, it wasn't anything like that. And of course, like, he knew that if he had heard someone say, "I'm dying," as clearly as it came through the recorder, he would have damn well remembered it at the time while he was in the room. So it was kind of a revelation that night. But they had bought this hospital with a mission in mind, and they were going to be the biggest and the best haunted house attraction in Utah. So they carried on with the work, but it wouldn't be long before all of the team would be having their own experiences. You'd put tools down while you're working on a set, and they'd just go missing. Or you'd hear the whisperings of disembodied voices when there was no one around. Now, you could pass this off as like forgetfulness, or it fell off the workbench, or the echoes of voices from coming down the hallways or something. whispering, until it was progressing to definite voices with tone, not just a whisper, calling out your name as clear as day. Again, while no one is around. Pretty creepy when you're alone in a pretty much abandoned hospital and you start thinking about all the people who died there. Maybe one even died right where you're working? But the show most definitely went on, and Asylum 49 started putting on their show and terrifying their paying customers with all the blood and gore that you'd expect in a haunted house attraction. But just like those stories of the little girl in the conference room, it soon became very clear to everyone working there that they most definitely were not alone in the old hospital. Because it seems like everywhere you turn in the place, there is a ghost story or a sighting or an experience tied to it. So I took a lot of these paranormal stories from one of my favourite authors, Richard Estep, and his book The Haunting of Asylum 49, which he wrote with Cami Anderson, one of the owners of the place, obviously Kim Anderson's wife. The thing is, with that book, a lot of the information that they use and tell visitors about in the ghost tours and whatnot have come from psychic mediums, and especially Misty Grimstead, who's like the resident psychic medium for Asylum 49. So, you know, however you feel about them, some of the information has come from her. Just something to bear in mind as we go through these stories. And oh my god, are there a lot of stories. I'm so sorry that it took me weeks to get this one out. Like, other than life stuff going on, it has been a massive job to get this done. But we're here now. I'm here and I'm back. Happy New Year. So I thought the most logical way of doing this is to go on our very own tour around the hospital, because I just think that that's the best way to show you exactly what's going on in each area. So if you go through the main doors of the hospital, the corridor kind of splits off. You can either go straight and end up in maternity or turn right and go down the main hallway. And the maternity area has so much activity reported in there. So as you've got the corridor, you've got patient rooms 1 and 2 on your left, and then you'll reach the labour and delivery room right at the end. And then on your right, there's some nurseries and more patient rooms where inpatients would stay. And I don't think it specifically means like mums and babies. I think if you would have come through the ER and you needed more care before going home kind of thing. But where all the mums would go is the labour and delivery area, which seems to be the home of a few different entities now. There's apparently a 7-foot tall figure of a man that just likes to stand and observe in the area. Like, the nurse's station is just opposite that room, and that's where you'll most likely see him. He isn't particularly threatening or anything, but he just sounds creepy. He will sometimes interact with visitors and investigators, with his voice coming through on EVP, calling out people's names. Like, the people that are in the room at the time, which is weird. He's also been recorded as saying, "Come here," once on an EVP, which, yeah, super creepy. The psychic medium Misty, she's claimed that there's also a nurse in the labour and delivery ward, apparently called either Eve or Eva. She's about 5'2", with short dark hair and kind of in her late 30s, mid 40s kind of time. She's apparently wearing a white, old-fashioned nurse's uniform, and according to Misty, she was just going about her daily tasks. Like, to her, there are patients in the hospital that need her care, so that's just what she was doing. She didn't really have any awareness that she's kind of, like, you know, not alive anymore. But she isn't a residual haunting. Like, apparently Misty was having an intelligent conversation with her. And I had a look, but I couldn't find any, like, lists or records of staff members from the hospital, because that would have been really interesting to see whether there actually was a nurse called Eve or Eva that worked on the labour and delivery ward. I also didn't find any other reports of, like, other people coming into contact with this nurse other than the psychic medium. So again, just a healthy dose of skepticism. That is what it is. Obviously not saying that there isn't a nurse in the labour and delivery ward, but without knowing that there actually was one that worked there and there's no other quote-unquote evidence, it's hard to say with certainty, you know? But the saddest story of an entity that hangs around the labour and delivery ward is that of a 16-year-old girl who died during childbirth along with her baby in the 1960s. When she's seen, she's almost always huddled in the corner, rocking back and forth and crying. And if there are any pregnant women or women who have just given birth or miscarried, so like anyone that's been pregnant recently, they're always strongly recommended not to go in there. Because on more than a few occasions, these visitors have been overcome with such intense emotion that they'll just drop to their knees crying. And it's always in the same place, in the far end of the labour and delivery ward, where the teenage girl has been seen. And there was a really strange story about this as well, because apparently there was a late night talk show, like radio thing, that was doing an investigation in the hospital. And they decided to do an EVP session in that labour and delivery ward. So apparently they were getting some like cool responses to to their questions via this EVP session, which like, yeah, very cool. Like I couldn't find it, but they were also actually broadcasting this investigation live onto this radio station. And the station was getting hundreds of phone calls from all over Utah complaining about what kind of hypnotism they were doing to the listeners. Because listeners all over the state were just breaking down in floods of tears, having the same intense emotional reaction that pregnant women had been experiencing when they were physically in that room, which is just incredibly weird. So the Tooele Valley Hospital had 3 nursery rooms in that maternity hallway for caring for the babies. These were the NICU, so like the neonatal intensive care unit, the nursery, and then the special nursery, which would have been used to care for babies with disabilities who needed that little extra medical care. So in these nurseries, there are a couple of entities. One is a doctor called Nicholas, and the other is a nurse. They don't really know who she is. She's never really given any information. Apparently, they both get quite irritated at Misty, the medium, because they don't actually appear to know that they're dead again, similar to the nurse in Labour and Delivery. And then they just get annoyed that Misty's like in the way while they're trying to help all of these babies. And I could just imagine it though, like as far as they're concerned, it's just another day in the office. They have sick babies to take care of, and there's a psychic medium standing in the middle of the room asking if they can see a light or something. And I don't know if you've met a busy doctor recently, but I can imagine how irked that would make them. I don't think there is any other type of doctor other than busy, come to think of it, but you know what I mean. They're there to do a job. Although I don't know if he realizes like what kind of hospital he works at nowadays, because that area of the hospital is also used in Asylum 49. Apparently, one night when the haunt was going on, an actor was dressed up as like a demonic doctor, and he'd pulled a visitor up onto this blood-spattered bed in the nursery. And so this actor was like pretending to do this simulated surgery on this poor guy. Misty, the psychic medium, she was watching the security camera when she saw a second doctor behind the actor. It was apparently Nicholas peering over into the bed at this quote-unquote terrified patient in it, just watching what was going on. Didn't do anything, didn't try to intervene, just watched. Like, what on earth are you doing to that patient, man? I'm not getting involved though. I'm just gonna watch, it's not my license on the line. There's also apparently the spirit of a patient that wanders around the nursery. The story goes that she died of cancer elsewhere in the hospital, but she chooses to come back to the nursery quite often, as 1, she's looking for her husband all over the hospital, so will come and check out the nursery, but 2, she comes to visit the babies that should be in there. Like, in her mind, I'm assuming it's a hospital, she's a patient there, there's a nursery, there should be babies in all the little incubators. She's in her 50s with strawberry blonde hair and is apparently seen wearing a hospital gown, and she's got one hand on her like IV stand that she has to like wheel around with her. And so the book mentions that all of this information about this patient has come from mediums, plural, which indicates that multiple mediums would have seen her. So it would be interesting to know if like all of these different people knew each other or had been told what other mediums have experienced, because then it's a bit more compelling, isn't it, if multiple mediums who don't know each other all sense the same person that looks the same in the same area of the hospital. Same mediums again. Mediums. Gonna be saying it a lot this video, just get over it. There are also the spirits of 2 young children that haunt the entire paediatric area, called Sarah and Tabitha. And while you hear like a lot of stories of ghosts in like real actual haunted locations not liking it when current owners change something or renovate, these 2 girls absolutely love Asylum 49 and the whole haunted attraction thing. So much so that they actually get involved. They think it's brilliant. They'll jump out at customers and hide under tables and beds, like ready to snatch at legs of visitors walking past. And once the season is over and Asylum 49 is done for the year, the 2 girls are actually said to get quite sad and lonely, missing the energy of all of those people. Like, it goes from being super busy in the season, like more and more energy in the place, it peaks at Halloween, and then other than like ghost tours and investigations and maybe staff members building sets or like maintaining the place, it's empty most of the time. So workers actually do sometimes go and sit in the nursery or even buy toys for the girls to play with to while away the eternity until the next season. So in Richard Estep's book, he says that Sarah looks to be about 6 years old with dark hair, wearing a white dress, and apparently died of pneumonia. Tabitha they know less about. She apparently appears wearing an old-fashioned yellow dress and could have potentially died of some sort of like brain tumour or bleed on the brain or something like that. And I'm pretty sure that this information has come from Misty or other mediums that have visited, so there is that. But In my research, I did come across another book called We Are the Children of Asylum 49, and it was put together by Tori Westhoff, and it's not like a book that you'd read cover to cover. It's actually a compilation of patient records and newspaper reports, photos and things like of all the children that actually died in the old hospital. It's not a complete list, but it does cover 179 deaths from 1953, so when the hospital opened, to 1998, a few years before it closed. And it contains the ones that could be proven, like by a death certificate, which would say which hospital the person was taken to, if they died there or they died on arrival, kind of thing. But the excellent thing is that Utah doesn't release death records into the public domain until 50 years after someone's death, so there's that. With all that being said though, there was no record for a Tabitha at all in this book, which if she appears wearing an old-fashioned dress, you'd expect that she would be in those records, like she wouldn't have died in the last 50 years. And obviously to be a patient at that hospital, she would have had to have died from 1953 onwards. So it's a bit, that she's not in there. But then Sarah. There is a Sarah in this collection of death certificates, but she was 11 years old, not 6, and she died of a fractured skull in a car accident, not of pneumonia. Tori goes on to comment in this book that it is apparently the same Sarah that is known to be haunting the hospital, not the 6-year-old that's mentioned in Richard's book. This Sarah, Sarah Crawford, was in the car with her family in April 1959, coming back from a holiday on the West Coast. They'd been on a good old-fashioned caravanning trip, so the car was hooked up to their caravan, towing it behind them, obviously. Sarah's mom apparently lost control of the car and ran off the road, causing the car to overturn. Sarah's parents and her younger sister Mildred were treated for minor injuries, but unfortunately Sarah was pronounced dead on arrival. The story gets even sadder, as apparently Tori found that Sarah had another sister, Sally June, who had died 3 years before in 1956, who could have potentially have been Sarah's twin. Like that poor family losing 2 kids within 3 years of each other. So yeah, I just wanted to put that in there because it might be that the 6-year-old Sarah and Tabitha just didn't get included in the book, like they didn't have the records available. But then also, I'm always a bit more trusting of the actual written record of who someone claims to be, if that makes sense. But it seems like Sarah isn't letting what happened to her hold her back, as while Tabitha is known as being a little bit more reserved, Sarah's apparently absolutely wild. I think the word they used in the book was rambunctious, but I think I'd say wild. Once, an asylum staff member fell asleep in the nursery. As you do, I guess, like in a big old abandoned hospital that's known to be haunted, but do you? But she was woken up by Sarah, playfully licking her hand. Which, I'm sorry, what? Waking up to see a ghost right near you would put me on edge anyway, but licking my hand? First off, absolutely feral, but just, no thank you, Sarah. So opposite the nursery are the first 2 patient rooms, those rooms 1 and 2. Back when the hospital was in operation, they would have had 2 beds in each, so when you were admitted, you'd stay in that room with another patient until obviously you were healthy enough to go home. And so nowadays, they actually do have beds in these rooms now, so like groups of people on the ghost tours can get like a feel for the place of like what it would have looked like kind of thing. So there was one point where the sheets on these beds, they would always be messed up. So you'd straighten them out, you'd go off and do something else, and then you'd come back to find them all messed up again. Bit annoying, but no one on the staff was admitting to it, and they hadn't seen anything weird, but it was continuing to happen. It wasn't until a psychic medium came to the hospital one day, and she said there was a spirit of a boy called Thomas, and that he loves it when they make the beds all nice so he can jump on them and mess them up. Like, cheers, Thomas. Just trying to keep the place nice and tidy, but glad you've got your own little playground going on. Then again, he is the spirit of a child trapped in a hospital, so find your own entertainment, I guess. This bit was interesting though. Apparently, according to this psychic, Thomas was one of the early settlers of Tooele, and he'd actually died an old man, but he preferred to manifest as a kid as he liked to be all carefree and childlike and all of that, which, that's interesting. Can entities just like choose what they manifest as? Do they all get a choice? I never really thought about it before I read that. But I guess it makes sense, doesn't it? Like, if you died riddled with cancer or mangled in a car crash, you don't tend to come back that way. Like, you'd normally come back as healthy. But then I've heard some stories of others coming back looking like they've clearly been through something. Like, there was that paratrooper from Ashwell Prison with all the blood on his helmet and all of that. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts, please. But this Thomas anyway, he's known as a really active entity in the hospital. He's also apparently now happy to communicate via EVP with investigators, and allegedly he's been captured in a photograph. seeming to be like peering around the doorway of the conference room at the person with the camera. Which, if you look at the map, like, yeah, it's close to where he loves to hang out. It's kind of like a straight shot across the bend of the corridor. Not that distance seems to be a problem for entities at the old hospital. A lot of them apparently wander through the entire building. Patient room 2, though, is apparently home to an entity that doesn't like to venture too far. She's also not super in your face, and so like as they started offering ghost tours of the hospital, they wouldn't really mention too much about room 2. Like at that point, they didn't even know she was there. In the meantime, there were all these EVP recordings going off, disembodied voices calling out members of staff, like tools going missing, phantom kids appearing in front of you, like lots of things to fill this ghost tour with already. But one day there was someone on one of these ghost tours, and she didn't describe herself as a medium, but she was just like more on the sensitive side. And the visitor went up to the guide and said that there was someone in room 2, and that they'd communicated with them. She said that the spirit was that of an elderly woman that had claimed room 2 as her own. The elderly woman then went on to tell this sensitive that she was a bit fed up of being ignored. Like, she was seeing all of these ghost tours going past and the guides regaling the tales of the strange and unusual happenings going on in the hospital, and then they'd get to room 2 and just completely walk past her. But she wasn't interested in being the star of the show. Don't want a big fanfare, and I'm not going to give you a juicy story to make me a main talking point of the whole tour. That's not me, no thank you. I just want a little bit of recognition that I'm here, that's all. Like, just give me a quick mention in the ghost tour, and I'm sat right here as you go past, and you need to go past my room, so you might as well. She also eventually said that she quite liked card games, so they brought a pack of cards into her room. But time and time again, they'd be playing, and then after a few rounds, she just seemed to lose interest, and apparently you could just feel her energy leave the room. Basically, don't outstay your welcome. I'm done now. That's enough social interaction. Goodbye. I get it though. I'm all about that attitude. So Misty, she made contact with this woman, as she tried to do with all the entities in the hospital, and found out that her name was Edith. But here's where the story gets very interesting. There was a woman that was visiting family in the area and wanted to show her kids the hospital that she had been born in, obviously Tooele Valley Hospital. I also think that it might have had a lot to do with the fact that they had seen the Ghost Adventures episode, so the kids probably thought it was really cool that their mom had been born in this haunted hospital. Because as they were going through this like little tour of the hospital, they started asking all about the different ghosts in the different rooms and all of that. So when they reached patient room 2, Cami Anderson, obviously one of the owners, started telling the family about the elderly woman, keeping the old lady happy, just giving her a mention. The woman that was visiting with her kids stopped in her tracks and said, "I think this is the room that my grandmother died in." And what was her grandmother's name? No, it wasn't Edith. It was Eva. Did the medium get it wrong then? Obviously, it had been a while ago, so I guess there was the chance that the mum maybe could have been mistaken, like it's a big hospital. But guess what Eva's daughter's name was? So that woman's mother, Edith. So now that's a bit of a coincidence, isn't it? But it gets even more interesting. After the woman and her kids had finished the tour, like finished visiting with the whole family and had gone back home, she digs out a picture of her grandmother Eva and sends it over to Cami. Cami then showed it to Misty, who was obviously the one that first said that the entity's name was Edith. Obviously, she didn't tell Misty anything about this conversation with the visiting woman or anything like that. But Misty goes, "Oh my god, that's the elderly woman in room 2. Where did you get this picture from?" Like, no prompting, didn't tell her anything about this picture. So that's weird, right? Too weird to just be a coincidence, maybe. Interesting, anyway. So those aren't the only patient rooms in the hospital. There are more on the other side of that corridor. So we're still in the maternity corridor, and now we're on the far end. So we've gone back, and we're opposite the labour and delivery room now. So this is where patient rooms 4, 5, and 6 are. And come on, this is Asylum 49. They're going to take advantage of the opportunity to slap a couple of extra numbers on that last room and call it room 666. And during the haunt season, there's usually a zombie nurse pushing an old man in a wheelchair out of that room. Because Meals on Wheels? I don't know. But that's not the only thing that's special about this room, because it is also said to be the home of an entity called Wesley. Wesley was a patient that had been living at the hospital in that room for a while, as he was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, so needed that round-the-clock care. And the thing about Alzheimer's is that sometimes you have good days where you're pretty lucid and just yourself, and then others you can really see the extent of the disease. And that was the same with Wesley. Like, sometimes he'd be friendly, happy, welcoming, which was who he was before, like how he had lived most of his life. But then other days he would be aggressive and violent. It's not him, it's not who he was before Alzheimer's, but it's just the way that the disease eats at who you are. Wesley would eventually pass away in the 1990s at the age of 89 in that room. So now it's a little strange that the atmosphere in that room is usually one of two options. Sometimes it's really inviting, visitors feel quite comfortable and happy in there, and then other times it's not nice. People feel very unwelcome in there, and some have even been physically pushed back over the threshold out of the room or even slammed against the wall. People who have potentially caught the spirit of Wesley on a bad day have even been left with literal bruises and scratches on them. But they're not quite sure if all of that violent negative activity is actually all from Wesley, because they think that maybe there is potentially something else in that room. And what I'm about to tell you is the creepiest thing I have ever heard, and it had me questioning my life choices on a Tuesday morning while I was reading it. Are you ready? Because one night, owner Cammy and another paranormal investigator, Kathy, were watching what they thought was the shadowy figure of Wesley moving back and forth across the corridor in front of his room, room 6, which is something that he's been known to do. Like, he sometimes paces in and out of his room and whatnot. But this time, it was moving so quickly, like it was flitting back and forth, that it was like distorting. So already very weird. But then it started moving closer to the two women. So it would go from like racing back and forth across the corridor, then it would disappear and then reappear just a little further up the corridor closer to them. But then it would disappear from where it was standing and go back to pacing in the corridor right outside room 6 again. But after pacing for a bit, it would disappear again, reappearing further up the corridor, getting closer and closer to the two women each time it did this. Kathy was a bit like, no thank you, and called out to the figure to go back to the end of the hallway, please. Just stay there, thank you. And apparently it would for a bit, but then it would go back to inching closer to them. And then it stopped pacing and stood there, staring at them, for what I could imagine felt like hours, wondering what was going to happen next. All of a sudden, it dropped down onto all fours and started crawling towards them, down the hallway. As it reached them, it stood back up right in front of them. Both women were on the floor at this point. Cammy had stood up very slowly, but Kathy was still lying on her belly. Cammy very slowly pointed out to Kathy that the shadow was standing right over her, and it was probably time for them to go now. Kathy agreed and did the same, very slowly standing up. As soon as she was all the way straightened back up, the shadow figure completely disappeared. Just gone. They still legged it out of there for obvious reasons. Like, the energy there was not nice at all. And so this encounter was totally out of character for what Wesley had been known for, which made them suspect that it was maybe something else, like maybe some other manifestation of some negative energy that's still there in the hospital. And now as I'm thinking about it, like, it would be interesting to know more about Wesley in life. Like, if there was some other negative energy going on that was originating from room 6. I mean, sorry, like room 666, of course. But was it this that was actually affecting Wesley as his mind was degenerating, causing him to have these bad days where he would get really violent? Like, obviously, the disease is going to make you have those outbursts of like agitation and stuff, but was that energy making him worse? I don't know, that was just a thought that popped into my mind. But yeah, like I say, like Alzheimer's disease, that is a very common symptom of that people get very aggressive and agitated. So it most likely probably was just that. But that is about everything for the maternity hallway. Now we move on to the main part of the hospital. I told you, this place was apparently haunted as hell, but you already knew that. Like, look at the length of this video, come on. So the main hallway, it runs from one end of the hospital all the way through to the other, and then like other places run off from it. So it's pretty much like the backbone of the hospital. And it is also the location of both residual and intelligent hauntings. There has been the apparition of a nurse pushing a patient in a wheelchair seen in this corridor. And this is like an actual nurse, not like a zombie this time. They had no awareness that they were being watched, like they didn't look over, didn't interact or anything like that. But there is one entity that is seen quite often in this area. His name is apparently Robert, who appears as a very tall, broad, shadowy figure that walks with a cane. He's described as being pretty outgoing. He's definitely not shy, like he doesn't really mind making an appearance or two, but he's totally harmless, a really sweet, nice entity that seems to look after the kids' spirits against other things in the hospital that perhaps aren't so nice. He actually once showed up behind Kim and Cammy one night as they were working, like directing visitors through the haunt. When they asked Robert if he could move from one side of the hallway to the other, he did exactly that. They tried recording this on a night vision camera, and while they could clearly see Robert's shadow on the viewfinder as they recorded it, when they played it back, there was no shadow, which is very weird. Turns out Robert seems to be quite interested in the other goings on in the hospital too, as he's been seen tagging along at the back of a ghost tour. No one seemed to notice he was there though. Now, could you imagine, like, you've just paid good money to go on this ghost tour and then you didn't even realise that there was a ghost following your group the entire time, right behind you. But that's the thing about the Old Tooele Valley Hospital. They seem to have encounters that are so frequent and compelling that it's like the activity is pretty much ask and ye shall receive, you know? Like, all you needed to do was set up your recorder and you get some amazing EVPs. Obviously, it's not to that extent. I'm sure there were times where you wouldn't have got anything, but you know what I mean? Could you imagine the tickets that you would be able to sell to people interested in the paranormal? Like, you could go to a specific room, try to contact this specific entity that was known to be here, and that you already had a bit of background information on them from like previous investigations, and then you were getting intelligent answers to that. At that point then, like, you've got a revolving door of visitors all wanting the same experiences, probably asking the same questions, getting them to flicker a torch on and off. Like, you know what I mean? It's not really getting to the bottom of who these entities were in life or finding out meaningful details about them, is it? Like, how many times can an entity knock on a wall twice before enough is enough, you know? And Kim, he would be made very aware of this. This story starts in the staff lounge and kitchen, which is just off the main corridor opposite the conference room, so where Kim had his first encounter with the young child apparition. The staff lounge and kitchen is said to be haunted by a young boy that's almost always seen with a tall man. There's also, on some occasion, been a black shadowy mass seen in the same area. So Kim was in that area with a group and they were communicating with the boy and the man using the flashlight. Eventually, this group actually saw the figure of the boy peeking out from behind the doorway. So like, now that's pretty cool, right? You pay for a ghost tour, you do a little investigating afterwards, and then you see an actual figure in front of you. You'd definitely go home and tell your friends about it, who would then go off and decide that they wanted to see a ghost, so they'd sign up for the next tour. You see where I'm going with this? It's kind of giving circus pony vibes. But one night, Kim had finished up with the ghost tour, he'd gone home, got ready for bed, and turned off the bathroom light, ready to get into bed. The bathroom light turned back on. Knowing absolutely that he had turned it off and there was no other explanation, but really not wanting to deal with it right now, he just went and turned it off again, and it turned back on again. Nah, we're not doing this. I'm tired. Leave the damn light off. He switched it off and hoped that that would be the end of it. Like, to him, it was clear that obviously someone had followed him home from the hospital, but he was just not in the mood to entertain whichever entity it was. We are not doing this. I am tired. Good night. As he was walking in the direction of his bed, he heard a very suspicious and very loud crashing coming from the bathroom. Can I not just go to bed and have some peace? He looked in the bathroom and all the stuff that should have been next to the bathroom sink was now all over the floor. Like, no, we are really not doing this. That is a tomorrow problem. Good night. No, thank you. He got into bed and he was just about to drift off into dreamland when he heard the unmistakable sounds of footsteps at the bottom of his bed. Like, after the bathroom fiasco, he clearly knew that whoever was in the bathroom had just moved into the bedroom, so he turned to look and see who it was. It was the tall man and the boy from the staff lounge. He told the man in no uncertain terms that he had to go back to the hospital immediately, but the boy could stay, but he had to sit in the corner quietly and stop pacing up and down at the bottom of the bed. To be fair to them, they did as they were told. The man instantly disappeared and the boy went and sat quietly in the corner. And that was that for the night. The next night though, things got bad. As soon as Kim walked into his home, something was off. Just trying to shrug it off and just hoping that it wasn't because the man and the boy had come back, he just went about his bedtime routine and went to bed. But he woke up in the middle of the night to the god-awful stench of something rotting. And before he could even get up out of bed to go and see what the hell had up and died in his house, he realised that he was completely stuck. He couldn't move a single muscle, and all he could see out of the corner of his eye was this solid black mass crushing him against his bed. Terrifying. He finally managed to throw the bed covers off him, and apparently the black mass went with it, and just like that, it was gone. He didn't really tell anyone about what had happened, but the next time he took a group around for an investigation, he found himself in the staff lounge communicating with the man and the boy when they seemed to move out of the way of something. It was the black mass thing that was also known to appear in the area. At one point, the spirit box, which is that one that's like scanning all the different radio stations, shouted out saying, "We are not your performing circus monkeys." Very interesting. Was it that same black mass that had just communicated through the spirit box that had followed Kim home and attacked him? And did the man and the boy follow him home before that to warn him, knowing what was going to happen? Interesting. And I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? If you die, and for whatever reason, you're spending eternity in this place, and then quite regularly you get eager people desperate to ask you what your name is and how you died, some people are going to get tired of that very quickly. So after that, Kim makes a point now of making people in the group aware that the man and the boy are okay with interacting with the living, like they don't mind it, but whatever the black mass is probably best left alone, to be honest. There are some people online that believe that the spirit of the man is actually Samuel Francis Lee, who was the guy that built his family home in Tooele that eventually became the first hospital. So that was the one, like, before it was replaced by this one we're talking about. And that the boy that's seen with him is actually his son, Thomas. Yeah, it's another theory on that Thomas that we spoke about earlier, you know, the one that likes messing up the patient bed sheets. However, there's too many holes in this one for me to believe it, to be honest. First off, it's only online sources that I can find this in, and they're always quoting the same sentence over and over again. So it's kind of been like, it's been written by one person and then copied and pasted all over the internet. Second, if I'm correct about the locations of the two different hospitals, Samuel would have never set foot on the ground where the quote-unquote new hospital was built, as he died in 1894, way before this hospital was built in 1953. I mean, even way before his own home was turned into a nursing home in 1913, which then became the first hospital like years later after that. And even if he had stayed like roaming his old house after death, like the look of the hospital, moved over to the new hospital in 1953, why wouldn't he then move on to the new hospital in 2002? Doesn't make sense. And third, a quick ancestry search on Samuel Francis Lee brings up that, yeah, the guy got busy, he had 11 kids, but not one kid was called Thomas. He is buried just next to the Old Tooele Valley Hospital though, in that cemetery I mentioned earlier, so there is that. But other than that, I think it's too much of a reach for me to say that that man and boy are Samuel and his son. Another entity that has appeared in that stretch of the hallway, well, I mean, he shows up wherever he wants in the hospital and has even followed women home to peep on them in the shower, but he's around that particular area a lot and is the entity known as Jeremy. He's even apparently being the one caught on camera in this photo. He appears as this tall, large man at the end of the corridor. And so the book mentioned that the face in the photo kind of looked like a caricature, you know, like those over-exaggerated features that you get on clowns. But I just want to say, like, I looked at the photo and I tried to edit it in Canva because I don't edit photos. And is it just that it's a grainy photo and it's just like matrixing on the face? Because I didn't really see the caricature-ness. I just saw a shadow, but I don't know. But the thing was, Jeremy was allegedly a burn victim who suffered third-degree burns all over his body before dying in the hospital. So he'd been wearing a mask over his face to protect his super fragile skin. Kim actually joked when he saw the photo that he said he looked like a member of the Insane Clown Posse. And he thought he was hilarious, but a medium told Kim that Jeremy was actually quite insulted by the comment, and so he stopped saying it. Like, I mean, you can understand it from Jeremy's perspective though, can't you? Like, not only do you lose your life in a terrible fire, but you also appear as a horribly disfigured apparition, and someone's having a laugh about how you look. Like, as if you haven't been through enough. And it's also just clicked as I'm recording this that Jeremy's appearing as a burn victim who's got this disfigured face. So what made him appear like that rather than the healthy pre-fire Jeremy from like what we were saying earlier? Interesting. Anyway, apparently Jeremy hasn't quite forgiven Kim for his comments yet and is still holding a grudge. But I don't think Kim has taken it to heart too much. While Jeremy isn't the worst entity they've got there, he isn't the nicest. Please see previously mentioned following women home to perv on them in the shower. For some reason too, he likes to lie and give paranormal investigators the wrong names, like he might say Thomas or Robert or another name of a different entity at the hospital. Thing is, Jeremy's got to tell. He's always accompanied by by the smell of smoke. So you'll always know when you're interacting with him, whether he is telling you the truth or fibbing. So now, if you walk past the staff lounge, you'll come to another corridor leading off from the main one. This green carpeted corridor is affectionately known as the Green Mile. And basically, if you carried on down there and through the double doors at the end, that would eventually lead you into the nursing home that used to be like part of the building. Apparently, there's a vortex in that corridor, and there seems to be a nurse that's taken on the role of gatekeeper, deciding which entities can pass through this vortex. Her name is Maria, and she is said to be a little on the stern side, doesn't mind telling you if she disapproves of you, kind of thing. And then if you go past that, there's a little hallway off the Green Mile that brings you onto the south side of the hospital into like the ER area. And that's when things get dark. It's apparently the part of the hospital where some staff members, especially female staff members, will refuse to go through alone. The south side of the hospital, and especially the Black Maze, is said to be haunted by an entity known only as the Guardian. And you think, oh, the Guardian, he sounds nice, right? Like guarding the spirits or something? Keeping an eye on the hospital to make sure it's all shipshape and shiny? Yeah, no. Apparently, this entity is as negative as it gets in the Tooele Valley Hospital. While they don't know specifically who he is, psychic mediums have picked up that maybe he was like part of the administration side of the hospital. So like working in the admin, like management, back office, or maybe even like a porter or something. But he would be one of those guys that would do anything to get ahead. You know, like learn everyone's secrets and use them to move on up, doesn't care who he kicks as he's moving on up kind of thing. And it seems that this entity is still that way inclined in death too, just basically being a bully and picking on people that he thinks are weaker than him. He's said to manifest as 7 foot tall, incredibly wide, and a completely black, solid 3D shadow. He has an awful, evil energy to him and absolutely hates anyone in his space. So back when the hospital was in operation, that area would have been complete organised chaos as a busy emergency room. So many people would have had their lives lost and saved in these rooms, with doctors making life or death decisions all the time. And so it only makes sense that that kind of energy leaves its mark. Apparently, there's an ER doctor that still haunts that area, which Cami Anderson has actually seen herself. One time, while she was waiting for a tour group, she saw him standing over one of the patient beds that was still set up there. He looked to be examining a patient that she couldn't see, but then he looked up at her and made eye contact. As soon as he did that, he vanished. He's also been seen from another, altogether more terrifying angle too. There was a volunteer who decided that that exact patient bed in the ER would be an amazing place to stop and take a nap while she waited for the next round of customers to come through the asylum. You already know where I'm going with this one, don't you? She woke up to find the ER doctor, complete with his white doctor coat, surgical cap, and protective face mask, staring down at her. I don't know what happened with her after that, but I can imagine she probably noped out of that bed pretty quick before she ended up on the receiving end of a phantom appendectomy or something. The X-ray room is also in that ER area, which makes sense as people would often go to the ER with broken bones, so no better place to have an X-ray room, right? In there's apparently an old X-ray technician that loved his job so much in life that he is still there in death. He's very active in and around the X-ray room, talking to investigators via EVP, and he's apparently even been captured on camera in that room. Once during an EVP session, a paranormal investigator asked what was the entity's name, to which he responded clear as day, and there it is again. It would have been amazing if I'd have had an old record of all the staff members that used to work in the hospital. There are so many doctors and nurses and everyone else that helps to keep hospital going still there, and it would be so compelling just to verify who actually worked there and find out more about them. And the photo that was captured of Peter, oh my god. The image is mainly of a paranormal investigator standing in the X-ray room, nothing untoward, until you look to the left-hand side. You can see what looks like the left shoulder of someone, potentially wearing a lab coat with a high up breast pocket on the left hand side maybe. Very interesting. And so those seem to be the main entities that haunt the Old Tooele Valley Hospital, but there are so many more. Like the spirit of a little boy called Christian, who's apparently been captured on EVP saying, "Don't touch my blanket," which sounds absolutely adorable, sad, and creepy all in one go. It's very conflicting. And so from all of these stories of all of these different entities in pretty much every single room of the hospital, you can see why paranormal investigators flock to it, and why everyone's favourite paranormal show, Ghost Adventures, went there not once, but twice. Because the thing was, even after Kim Anderson took on the hospital part, the Rocky Mountain Care Centre was still running the nursing home in the other section. But in 2017, they sold the rest of the building to Kim and moved out to a new facility in Tooele. So Ghost Adventures had to come back and investigate the nursing home section too, because it makes sense that if the hospital part of the building is haunted, then the nursing home part would be too, right? Apparently so. In an interview for the show, one of the nurses said that often if they heard one of the residents saying that they could see a little girl, they knew that they were going to die soon, or someone close to them, like a neighbour in the next room or something. And it wasn't just the residents seeing apparitions. Kim told the Ghost Adventures crew that when they had taken over the nursing home section, they noticed that one of the security cameras had a black dot of tape over the lens, which is a bit weird, like you've got a security camera for a reason, but okay. They found out that this was because the nurses working at the nursing home would be sitting at the nurses' station at night, say nursing home one more time, and then they would see figures on the security camera walking up and down the corridor, which understandably would freak them out. And that isn't exactly conducive to a positive working environment looking after people's loved ones. But I mean, I totally get it. I would rather live in ignorance if I had to work there. I'd rather not see the figures moving around in that corridor if I knew I'd had to be going up there on my own at some point. And so if you visit the Old Tooele Valley Hospital during Halloween, you'll likely be scared out your skin by demonic doctors and maniacs with chainsaws. But after the actors have gone home and the place is in darkness, that's when you might catch a glimpse of some of the real history that still lingers in those empty corridors. So let me know what you think, because I have absolutely zero doubts in my mind that this place is so ridiculously haunted. You want to know the stories that really say to me that a place is truly haunted? It's the ones where people mention someone or something just totally like it's no big deal, like because they think it is normal. And what I mean by that is like when visitors mention seeing a little girl in the middle of the maze. Like, yes, it's strange to see a kid acting in a haunted house, but it's a good idea, isn't it? It sends the creep factor like through the roof. So to the visitors, it can't be anything other than a kid acting in the maze. And rightfully so, they're creeped out by it. So they mention it to the owners like, oh, that kid in the maze, like super creepy, really nice touch. But there is no kid, at least not one that's placed there by the owners. I think the point I'm trying to get at is that when people experience paranormal activity, but they don't know that what they've just experienced is paranormal. Because in that way, there's no way they can exaggerate it, embellish it, because to them, it is just a normal encounter with another living person. Like the same thing was reported at the Wookiee Hole Caves, where a few people over the years had said that they'd seen divers walking through the caves, and some had even helped them with like directions on how to get out and things like that. It's stories like that that really indicate to me that a place is haunted. Are all of the stories in the hospital true? There's always going to be a little bit of doubt, simply because there is so much activity in seemingly every room. And there's different stories online where some of the stories just seem like too much of a reach for me to believe. And then where a lot of information has come from interactions with a psychic medium, I do believe that some psychic mediums can pick up on entities or events from the past. Like, I have friends that are more sensitive, and some of the things that in the past that mediums have said to me, like there's no way that they could know about. But I'm just a little reluctant to say for sure that an entity exists or is who they claim to be based on just conversations with just one psychic medium. Again, like if multiple mediums who haven't spoken to each other all come up with the same information, then that gives it a little bit more weight to what they're saying, if that makes sense. But then that's like an awful lot of variables to be able to trust implicitly, isn't it? But with all that being said, like paranormal investigators are always gathering more evidence at the place, more EVPs, and like those photographs are insane. I had to stop looking at them because it got to like 10 o'clock last night and I was scaring myself. And then it's the report after report of staff members and visitors all experiencing similar things. Objects going missing, seeing apparitions that just show that there's got to be something to a lot of these stories. But please do let me know what you think. If you visited or experienced anything yourself, you know I want to hear all about that. And if you've gone on a ghost tour as well at the hospital, or there are stories of other entities or encounters that I've not mentioned in this video, please comment them down below. I'm sure there are loads of stories that I've missed out. But if you enjoyed this video, I would love for you to let me know and give this video a little like for me. And if you really like it and you want to hear more, you might want to subscribe as well. Extra little bonus. I don't know. But that is all from me today. I cannot wait to chat with you more next week. So I hope your week goes well. I hope you enjoy this first week of 2024. And until next time, sleep safe. It feels like ages since I've done this. It is because it's been ages since I've done this.